I'm going to briefly explain how I think Ethereum can serve as the foundation or base layer for a new kind of state, a new kind of civilization which actually protects and preserves human rights and freedoms, and how this stands in direct opposition to the trajectory we're on now, where we're increasingly living in these states that are suffocating and strangling away our rights and freedoms, where the freedom of speech continually erodes, where privacy decreases, taxation and regulation always go up, and standard of living always goes down. We have this bureaucratic mass which sits above us in this control system, and it just gets bigger every year, and it weighs upon us, and it's suffocating us. And the system that we're building looks a lot like the Mark of the Beast system described in the Book of Revelation, which is crazy. And I think if this thing is allowed to evolve past a certain point, if we build this panopticon with sufficient power, top-down control, we might hit a point where it's just too late. That's it. We're done. And so I'm going to explain briefly what I think is the only viable alternative to this. We have a path that we can take, and we must take soon, that can allow us to escape from this hellish panopticon control system that seems to be on the horizon. This video will focus primarily on a relatively small part of a much bigger picture or vision. And I'll do a full video explaining this entire vision in the future. But for now, I actually want to talk about just some of the broad strokes here. Where we're starting here is with the past. So where did we come from? And the model that I'm going to use here is the one presented by Carl Jung, in his book Ion. And this is based on the precession of the equinoxes, where the Earth's axis sort of gradually moves through the different constellations in the zodiac. And what Jung did was he mapped these ages to changes and evolution in the human psyche and our values and our ways for coordinating. And the first age to talk about here is the age of Aries. So this is the 2,000 years before Christ. This is the time of ancient Rome, ancient Greece, Alexander the Great. And this is an age of force and war. The symbol here is the ram, and rams hit things with their head. They're not sophisticated in a sense. They're powerful. And I think the real peak of this age in some sense is the Roman Empire. The Roman Empire is like the fullest realization of this kind of ethos or this kind of operating system. Where the Roman Empire, it reached this incredible size. It was this giant empire. But at its height, it was so big that the people on the edges, they had never been to the capital. They didn't know, they weren't really Romans in some sense. They weren't invested in the Roman Empire per se. And a lot of them were slaves, right? The Roman Empire had a pretty large percentage of its citizens as slaves. So that, I think, you kind of hit a limit on how big your empire can get if you're running that operating system. If your model is force, conquering, slavery, you're going to hit a point where it just doesn't really work anymore. Okay, then the next age we have is Pisces. And this age is ushered in by Christ, right? Jesus Christ appears, and we have a new, among many other things, we have a new kind of operating system presented for the next civilizations. Because now, instead of having your empire focused around a geographical capital, like in Rome, here you have this empire of Christendom united under a symbol, right, with no geographical center. So Christ is just the symbol. Christ is the center. These new empires unite under that symbol, and therefore they can grow much bigger. They can become much more powerful. So then we have this age of Pisces playing out, and one of the really interesting sort of elements of this age is this dynamic tension between Christ and Lucifer, this dynamic tension between these opposites. And with this sort of Luciferian spirit, one of the main characteristics of that spirit is scientific understanding and knowledge, the expansion of human technology and power. This spirit of Luciferian knowledge and science, it brings us closer to the gods. It gives us more capability. So at the kind of end of this age of Pisces, we reach this rather terrifying point where our technological power really is godlike. It really is terrifying. And, so the Christian kind of warning against this is not without justification, that's for sure. But this scientific power also gives us ability to create and discover, and it's actually quite, in some sense, it's quite human. So now that we're at the end of Pisces, we're in the beginning of this new age of Aquarius. And to me, I think this new age is presenting us with some options. There's different paths ahead of us. I don't think the future is predetermined. And so now we move into kind of the future forks ahead of us. So the Christian model in, the book of Revelation presents this very terrifying prophecy, or warning perhaps, where we may see the rise of a physical person on earth who is an antichrist figure. And who knows what exactly that person looks like, but this figure would perhaps give rise to a control system, to a panopticon that would allow for human beings to be caged in like a almost permanent, inescapable sense. And in the full video, I'll talk more about how this, I think, is quite realistic possibility, and we're kind of building this in certain ways. But I think this is not, predetermined, right? And we have different options. But to me, the Christian option being presented as an antidote or alternative to this path is quite lacking. It seems like some of the Christian ideas being presented are just, well, we'll just go back in time, we'll delete all this technology, we'll nuke the data centers or whatever, and we'll just kind of run away from the future as such. But to me, there's a third way. And if we're going to be true sort of children of this age of Aquarius, we need to find a third way. We need to find a synthesis. We need to find a synthesis perhaps between the Christian energy and the Luciferian energy, right? These qualities of this kind of Luciferian power of technology and science, they're dangerous, but they're not all bad, right? We can use technology as a tool to secure a future which is not like this, which is not oppressive and horrible, but which preserves our freedoms and can serve as a vehicle or like a spaceship almost that we can use to navigate into a bright and beautiful and exciting and crazy possible future. So that's kind of where I see Ethereum and this world computer fitting into this picture. So as I said in the intro, I think Ethereum serves as the foundation or platform upon which we can build a new set of states, a new set of civilizations. So we have this world computer, which is this open system. It's just a programmable platform, a world computer. And upon that system, we can build new kinds of money and finance, but then also other things in the civilizational stack, right? Any functional large-scale civilization needs to have institutions for doing science and journalism and media and governance, right? At the top of that pyramid, you need to have ways to govern your society. And on this platform, to me, the vision for Ethereum has always been to build this entire stack. It's to build the whole civilizational operating system stack in a reimagined way, so we can have a new generation of actual civilizations. So this world computer becomes this shared foundation for new kinds of states. And there's a bunch of ideas for what these might look like already. And I'm not necessarily saying any of these are the final form or that any of these are the answer, but the process is good. We need to experiment and try stuff. There's people doing these startup cities. There's Balaji Srinivasan's network states idea. There's Ralph Merkel's DAO democracy. There's the kind of AI democracy that I've talked about. And so what I think is great about this path to building these new societies on this common substrate of Ethereum is that Ethereum has these base layer rights. Any societal operating system you build on this platform, the citizens there should have these rights. They should have property rights, right? Because Ethereum as a platform, it guarantees property rights to people who use it. You can have your assets. You can have whatever crypto assets you want, and they cannot be seized. Ethereum also ensures the right to transact with DeFi protocols, with whatever protocols. So there's this right to be an economic actor, right? And this stands in direct opposition, again, to that Antichrist mark of the beast system where people can be turned off from the financial system. That is what can happen in the centrally controlled financial system we live in now, right? That has happened, that does happen. People get deleted from the economy, basically, and then they're truly left to starve. So with a system like Ethereum, there's the right to be an economic actor is protected. You also have the right to create and deploy new systems. So, a lot of crypto systems have the basic property rights, but Ethereum being a smart contract platform, it also has the ability for anyone to create their own system, their own DeFi system, their own whatever system, and deploy it. You can't stop someone from deploying contracts on Ethereum. So all this taken together, it's sort of like these rights which are enshrined in the protocol are like the new constitution or something for a united network states of Ethereum, something like that, right? These rights are programmed in. And so just as a side note, a commenter asked me what Ethereum's core values are. And I thought that was an interesting question because this stuff, these are the real rights. These are the core values in a sense. Everything else is kind of secondary. So if you look at the kind of vibe that Ethereum meetups have, or that Vitalik sort of presents in his writing and his talks, that's separate from these core rights. Like these things are the real rights of the system. The vibe, that's secondary. You don't have to adhere to that if you don't want to. So I'll talk more about that in a second too. So as we move up from this base layer, we have these different kinds of state, which I mentioned. We have these weird experiments into these sort of private cities, these private states that people create, where maybe you have to apply to join them, and it's whatever. Maybe it's good, maybe it's bad. Then we have Balaji Srinivasan's network states ideas, which I'll talk more about in the future too. And this is, I think, a really interesting approach where you allow for these new states to sort of develop online first. These communities develop online first, and then as they progress and develop, they eventually acquire land, or they find some geographical place to kind of fulfill their realization as actual states. You also have Ralph Merkel's DAO democracy idea, which is something I've been meaning to talk about for a couple of years, actually. And this is a new way to structure democracy itself. And I think it's incredibly brilliant, the way to think about this way of thinking about democracy. And there's also experiments like Vitalik had this Zuzalu thing, which was this little like kind of startup temporary city thing. And as I mentioned, I also have talked a little bit about this potential for an AI sort of democracy where we have representatives, which are actually AI models, and they're provably trained on information that we consider to be good, like good founding documents and so on. And we could have them provably representing the actual will of the people. So there's all kinds of new experiments that can be done here, and I'm convinced we can find much better models for managing a civilization than what we've encountered or discovered so far. And so the way that I think about this possibility of building this new set of states on top of this common platform is sort of like we're building this ship, like a civilizational spaceship or something. Or you can think of it like many different ships, right? And again, this is something I'll talk a lot more about in the future, but I like this metaphor because, I think when I think of the current civilizational infrastructure that we run our world on today, it seems to me that this resembles in some way like an old wooden ship, or maybe something like the Titanic, right? It's this like big, giant machine. And a lot of the civilizational systems which we run our world on, they're like machinery. It's like a ship where you have your power plant and your water systems and your plumbing, and a lot of a civilization is just that kind of stuff. It's systems which keep the lights on and which run the thing. And it seems to me that these ships need to be refreshed periodically. And I think the ship that we're largely in today, our civilizational ship, it's getting old. Like a lot of these systems were developed before computers even existed, right? Like computers are such a fundamentally new thing that they really do necessitate the reimagining from the bottom up of your entire civilizational ship, your whole operating system. And to me, that's what this is. That's what this opportunity is. It's the opportunity to build a new ship. So that, I think, is one of the basic outcomes, I think, of rebuilding this stuff will just be that that all people are wealthier. Life is a bit materially better, right? Because that, having enough food and water and having a certain amount of material wealth, it's largely just a matter of having functional economic systems. It's not like this impossible thing that you need magic to solve. It's about, we know how to do this. It's engineering, really, right? But then the next task, once you have a ship which is functional, and I think, by the way, like, we need to build this thing in parallel. You can't reform the old ship. You can't improve the systems and try to fix stuff. It's too old. You need to build a parallel one, and then you start migrating people over. But again, once you have that thing being built and it's starting to work and people are kind of living better lives, then you need to think about, where is the ship going, right? A ship not only has to run, it has to have functional engines and so on. It needs to have somewhere to go. But this, to me, again, is one of the great features of this path, is because this path is maximally preserving of freedom. Because upon this civilizational ship, upon this Ethereum platform, people can build whatever kind of society they want. If some people want a quite socialist, sort of leftist, country or state, they can build that. They can build that, right? And they can see how well it works. And maybe it works, reasonably well, or maybe it's a disaster, right? And if people want a libertarian kind of state, maybe with Bitcoin as as the primary money, they can do that too, right? These little civilizations, they don't have to, use ETH per se. They can build on the platform, but then still enshrine Bitcoin as the money if they want. They could be right-wing, they could be conservative, they could be Christian. I don't see any reason why you can't build a sort of Christian-focused little society on a platform like this. It's an open source operating system. It's like if you think of Linux or something, you can run whatever kind of program you want on there. And also, I think, people could build a Promethean sort of civilization on this system. And to me, this is the one that I favor most. This is the kind of synthesis that I was talking about, where we have we have the Christian energy, and then we have this sort of Luciferian energy. Though rather than Luciferian, I would use the figure of Prometheus, because Prometheus precedes Christianity, and Prometheus doesn't have sort of the baggage of Lucifer, right? Prometheus is this great benefactor of mankind who gifts us technology and the arts, this ability to become better and to grow and to become, to grow up, to become like adults rather than children. Prometheus is like a big brother, he kind of walks beside us and shows us the way. He's not like a strict father who kind of dominates over us and says, obey and do this. He wants us to become our own person. That's how I think of Prometheus. So, and again, I'll talk much more about this Promethean vision in the next video. But I just want to zoom out again and say that if we, again, think of these civilizational operating systems of the past, the operating system of Aries that the Romans flourished under, then Aquarius, which was this age of Christ, the empire of Christ, and now we're in this age of Aquarius, and we have this tension between Christ and Antichrist, Lucifer. And to me, this is the age where we can have a new kind of civilizational operating system, a third kind of operating system. And to me, that operating system is this. We first have this great experimentation where people can have their freedom to try all kinds of different stuff. And then the building of a new civilization becomes very much this open source stack where we have experimentation and sharing of information and forking and versioning of economic systems and mechanisms, of money systems. And we figure that out. We move up the stack. We build more functional civilizations. And then we kind of have this rapid and open experimentation in terms of these higher level ideals, these set of ethos that kind of serve as the North Star for these different civilizational ships. And that to me can provide this path out, this alternative to the path that we kind of seem to be on as the default, which again is this rather dark descent into this panopticon, which was prophesied and warned about in the book of Revelation. So that's all I'll say for now, and in the future I'll explain a lot more about all of this, including what I think this Promethean vision can actually look like, and how, to me, I think the ultimate sort of possibility here is that we expand out into the stars and we create life for ourselves. And that to me is quite exciting.